The story of how science has helped our apple industry to significantly reduce pesticide use has recently been published. Farewell Silent Spring, the New Zealand apple story, is written by entomologist Howard Waring. It tells the story of how a research and development program was developed over decades to ensure New Zealand apples are delivered to consumers pest-free with no detectable residues.
In 1967, I joined a team of researchers who were already working on more sustainable production of pip fruit, particularly with regard to pest management. And the reason that this program had got underway was that the industry was facing resistance problems in certain pests, particularly mites, from their spray programs. In the 1940s and 50s, the organochlorine and organophosphate insecticides had come into use, and these were broad-spectrum chemicals. The result of this was that they destroyed many other organisms in the orchard apart from the pests that were actually the target. And in '59, Elsie Collier came out from England to start research to investigate why this was happening. Was this the same story as had been found in other parts of the world, or was it different? So she was based in Auckland and conducted research on the natural enemies of mites, and showed that in fact the same picture emerged. There was destruction of natural enemies by these insecticides, and this was unsustainable because with resistance development coming in the mites themselves, the industry had to keep finding new chemicals faster if they could, then the insects were becoming resistant. In the case of mites, that was quite a race because the mites were very fast at doing this. So that drove the initial work on sustainable pest management, but it then grew enormously and changed greatly over the next 40 to 50 years.
The New Zealand industry has actually been looking at the reduction of chemical usage and the minimisation of residue levels for many years, right back to the early 1990s when what we call the Integrated Fruit Production Program first came in. If you move forward to the mid-2000s, the supermarkets in the United Kingdom came under pressure from Greenpeace to remove a lot of the residues off its fruit. And so you had Greenpeace people actually getting fruit out of the supermarkets, testing them themselves, and outside the supermarkets having photos of fresh produce with skull and crossbones superimposed on them to reflect the fact that the residues were quite high. As a result of that, the European supermarkets decided to impose their own private standards, their own maximum residue levels, which were far lower than what the European regulators had in place. Now, a lot of the exporters to Europe protested about that and said, this is outrageous, we can't do it. But the New Zealand industry, along with our science partners, Plant and Food Research, said, actually, we believe we can do this, and we believe it'll give us a competitive advantage for doing it. So Apple Futures was born, which is the low residue program. As a result of that, we can get into many markets on much better access conditions than any of our competitors anywhere in the world. We export to 70 markets. Europe in particular is strongly focused on residues. But now even if you look into Asia, which is where our growth is, more than 50% of our crop goes to Asia, they're very concerned about food safety, they're very concerned about sustainability. So it gives us a major competitive advantage to get into those markets. Every grower in New Zealand grows according to the same rules. So we have 260 growers now. It's not a large number of growers compared to the old days of the 1990s when there were 1,600. We've consolidated, and all of them use the same integrated fruit production and integrated pest management system. So we have absolute confidence that whatever fruit ends up in the market will be grown according to the same conditions in the same way. Well, New Zealand's a very small producer. Actually, we produce half of 1% of the world's apples. So if you look at a comparison, we produce 600,000 tonnes of apples. China produces 43 million tonnes of apples every year, they're half of it. But having said that, half of 1%, we've been named the world #1 apple industry for the last 4 years, independently assessed by a company called Belrose Group in the United States. So out of 32 countries that are assessed on a number of things, including production practices, including the Apple Futures programs, we've come out #1. What we are seeing, though, broadly across all the markets is the consumers' priorities are changing. So back in the late 1980s and 1990s, it was all about pests and diseases. Today, they're more concerned about residue levels, about food safety, about sustainability. And when we talk of sustainability, we're not just talking about environmental, but we're talking about economic, we're talking about social, and we're talking about cultural sustainability as well. So there's been a massive shift in consumer expectation. And again, the practices we've put in place through the Apple Futures and other programs actually that we've got have allowed us to address the concerns of consumers much quicker and much more fully than other countries. Very clearly, Apple Futures was a game changer for us. So the 1990s into the 2000s, the low residue stuff put us on a platform that no one else in the world could actually achieve. I talk about it as being a competitive curve, and for a while there we were all playing around on the same competitive curve. Apple Futures jumped us to the next level, to the next curve, and our aim right now with all of our research and science is to stay on the curves above everybody else. Historically, it's been a biennial industry as well. You have a very strong production year followed by a lower production year. What we're finding now, though, is we're on a very sustainable growth path, and part of that is to do with the new varieties we're developing, which are not so biennial in nature. It's to do with the fact that every year we're planting 5% more land area than the year before, so we've got a constant growth coming on stream. And you have to say the industry now is in very strong heart.
Thanks, New Zealand On Air.